Therefore choose life that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice and holding fast to him. For he is your life and length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them. Deuteronomy 30. I suppose that one of the temptations we all face is to say that all the social ills and other ills in our society stem from disobedience. Disobedience to God's laws, especially the Ten Commandments, disobedience to the natural law, disobedience to honoring father and mother. Disobedience seems to be everywhere. I was thinking about this and I was remembering back in the 1960s, living in Washington, D.C., a very volatile time. I had an older sister who was and still is basically a hippie. And I remember, going with her, and there were always, you'd go into little stores in this neighborhood called Georgetown, very different places, Georgetown, and you'd go into these little stores and they'd be burning incense, there'd be all these beads you'd walk through and all this stuff, and the big message of the day was, man, make love and not war. Remember that? Some of you, make love and not war. Well, that was supposedly about the beginning of the sexual revolution, and probably started before that, actually. But, now I've been thinking about it. This sexual revolution has been going on for 60 years. Hasn't it run its course like about 59 years ago? How much can this go on? And yet it just seems to be multiplying all the time. One crazy thing after another. Surely there's a lot of disobedience going on here. And then that's also, it seems like our trusted institutions face scandal. The church and the medicine and other things like that. So often it seems as though they're serving themselves before they're serving others. And quite often it seems as though once trusted institutions are just going along with the culture, just conforming to it rather than challenging it and lifting up a more noble reality. And then there's the tension of war and things like that. I was looking, several decades ago they invented this thing called the Doomsday Clock, which was meant to be a measurement of how close we are to nuclear war. And I was looking at it and it said, on a scale of where midnight is nuclear war, we are at 11:58 p.m. Like, uh-oh. Right? You think that's not too good. And the thing about it, that time just doesn't move all that much. A little bit back and forth occasionally, but it still seems as though we're close to war. And so we get very frustrated. Don't we? Frustrated with society, frustrated with institutions, frustrated with ourselves, because we too sin. Now, in one sense, nothing is new under the sun, right? Look back at Isaiah, fast forward from the point of Moses and entering, his people towards the promised land, and then go to the time of Isaiah. What does Isaiah say? Woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil, that put darkness for light, and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter. The world turned upside down even then, as it is today. But it is just frustrating. Of course, it's very frustrating to God himself. Just look at the passage sometime before the one in Deuteronomy today. And there God says, it doesn't have to be this way. I haven't hidden the reality of what I command to you. I have made it known to you. Just consider the scene of that Old Testament lesson today. The people are on the verge of entering into the promised land. This new generation, which is supposed to be more obedient, has been given this promised land after 40 years in the wilderness. It's right before them. And God says, choose life. Listen. Obey. Follow me. Don't choose death. I've laid it all out before you. It's clearly seen. And yet, disobedience continues over and over again. You see, the frustration of this in the book of Proverbs, where it actually has this one saying where just as a dog returns to its vomit, not a real, pleasant picture, is it? So a fool returns to his folly. Oh my. We have problems. I remember years ago there was a movie came out, Liar, Liar. Do any of you remember that with Jim Carrey? And Jim Carrey in the movie plays the part of a really kind of sleazeball lawyer, a person who will do anything to get ahead. And then all of a sudden, his son makes a birthday wish, it's all fantasy of course, and says, I just wish that Dad would speak the truth. And sure enough, he has to. The lawyer has to. All of a sudden, he has to speak the truth, much to his own chagrin and horror. Well, as this is going along, his secretary receives a phone call from a criminal guy who's always getting off thanks to Jim Carrey's manipulations. And he says to the secretary, can you please put, the lawyer on the phone because I want to see how I can get out of this crime also. And the character of Jim Carrey takes the telephone and says, stop breaking the law! It's not that hard. Stop breaking the law. I'm sure God feels that way with us also. But in spite of the fact that it all seems so obvious, just don't do it. And in spite of the fact that we do it anyway, how frustrating that is. There is really more to it than that, isn't it? I mean, consider that lesson once again. Before following the commandments, what we are called upon to do is to love the Lord our God. To love the Lord our God. You see, all those people who are about to enter the promised land, you can bet that they knew the Ten Commandments. Moses had been sure that he had drilled that into their heads. They knew what the law was. But the basic problem for them was not first that they didn't follow the law, but rather they didn't want to. They wanted to do their own thing. They were going to delight not in the law of the Lord, but in the end to delight in their own ways and in their own desires. They put those things, the things that they love, the self-love, the love of money, the love of power, the love of sexual desire, above love for God. Love for God. Did you notice when we read the Psalm today that it talks about delighting in the law of the Lord? Delighting in the law of the Lord. How many people really do that? Do you delight in the law of the Lord? When you see the speed limit at 55, do you say to yourself, wow, that's really reasonable. Isn't that just wonderful? We have this reasonable speed limit, and everybody, if we all just follow it, there won't be as many head-on collisions, and that person behind me won't be so anxious to roll right over me. Let's just all follow it. How delightful it is. We don't, do we? We think to ourselves, 55? I've got 5 minutes to get there. What are they talking about? Let me see. I think it's true that it talks. I think I could go over the speed limit 7 miles, and I'll still be safe. Right, I'm not going to turn. Joe's looking at me. He knows all. He can tell you a million stories, right, Joe? He can tell a million stories, right? But people aren't really, delighting in the law, right? Or we get up on a Sunday morning and we think to ourselves, oh, that dress, oh, it's going to be hard, but I just know I should do it. Yeah, I should do it. Right? And so we do all these things, but God says, love me. Love me. Even before obedience to me, I have loved you. I have loved you with an everlasting love. In me, you are secure. In me, you are forgiven. In me, you have new life. And so the question for us quite often is not whether or not we will obey the law. Most of us will do a fairly good job of that. But the question for us is, how shall we delight in the law? Now it's interesting. This last week, we had on Tuesday the commemoration of Gregory the Great. Gregory the Great. Probably not a household name to most of us, I'm imagining. But he was a very interesting person. He lived from not lived, he served as Pope from 590 to 604. 590 to 6404. It was a very volatile time in the Roman Empire. Way back when. Romans faced the possibility and the threat and the actual happening of barbarian invasions. Lots of warfare going on and threatening the empire. The society itself seemed very down. There was a lot of greed and corruption, a lot of sexual immorality. People were doing their own thing. The church itself had become very corrupt. And there was this man, Gregory. Now, he by nature was not really an extrovert. He was not a real people person. He was a kind of contemplative person who loved to pray, who loved to read the scriptures, and all these things. But in spite of himself, he was called upon time and again to be a leader in the church. He just had this ability, this sincerity, etc. And so eventually, reluctantly on his part, he was called upon and elected as Pope. And when he took over the papal office, he did some interesting things. He enforced the law, which people hadn't done. He threw out corrupt priests and bishops. He also returned the church to concern for the poor. He was actually known that at every evening dinner, he would have dinner with the homeless. He would invite them in and have dinner with homeless people just so that he would stay in touch with the poor. And yet he also did one other thing. He urged Christians to consider and contemplate what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful. What is good, true, and beautiful. To read the Holy Scriptures, and to pray, and to think about the wonders of God. Because, it was interesting, this rather mousy guy knew something really quite profound. And that is that God has given to us desire. Desire. And the desire should be for good things. Too often in life, we desire not the things of God, but other things. But Gregory said, the beautiful things of God are close at hand. And so it is wonderful when a man desires to be in the company of his wife. It is wonderful when we study the universe, look at the sun and the moon and Jupiter and all the planets and see how they are in line with one another, how God has created a beautiful creation. It is wonderful when we open the Word of God and it seems as though He is talking to each of us directly as His beloved children. We have been given the law. But even before that, we have been given the love of God. Your destiny and my destiny is to be with the Lord forever and to worship Him in holiness, to be overwhelmed by His company. Sometimes when I talk to Christians and they think about heaven, what they seem to be describing to me is a family reunion on steroids. Oh, I'll get to see Aunt Susie and Aunt Eddie, and I understand all that, but there's so much more. There's God! Face to face. generations of Christians celebrating the love of God in a heaven lit up by his very presence. There's so much more to life than we often see or even see. Thanks be to God. One of my favorite Lutheran writers is Johann Gerhard, and he wrote these words in a prayer. He says, "O eternal and merciful God, I give you eternal thanks that you have not only given me body and soul, but also have provided me with many gifts of soul, body, and possessions. You, O highest wisdom, teach knowledge to all people. Therefore, if I experience anything that is good, this shows your abounding grace towards me. Without your light, my mind is darkness. Without your grace, my will is captive. Any mental capability and knowledge I have comes from your mercy. Knowledge enlightens the soul. Divine grace enlightens knowledge. Whatever we know is learned either from the light of nature or from the revelation of the Word. Both come from you. You are the light of eternal wisdom. Surely whatever we know comes to us from you as a gift. May our life be about unwrapping this gift, living in the love of God, and following his commandments in sheer joy. Amen.